Are you going to pay with corn? The salesman laughs at the farmer. His eyes, like the rain that once took his wife, hold a silence. His hands, calloused by time that pardons no one, open a worn wallet. The pain of his loss accompanied him for years, until that morning, amid scornful looks and mocking smiles, he rediscovered his dignity. In a world that judges by appearances, his values shone brighter than any car body. As his Eleanor used to say, the dust of the field doesn't soil the worth of those who work with their hands. If this story touched your heart, that like is a hug to all those unjustly judged. And tell me, how do you think this story will end? Your experience might illuminate others walking the same path. The late afternoon Madrid sun slanted obliquely across the glass facades of Gran Via, turning every building into a mirror that multiplied the light until it was nearly unbearable. Amidst the roar of engines and the incessant chatter of tourists and locals, Auto Palace stood as a temple to automotive luxury, a sanctuary where money and status merged into aerodynamic bodies and roaring engines. The automatic glass doors reflected George Harrison's face before opening to receive him. 57 years carved by the Andalusian sun, a perfectly trimmed graying beard, hazel eyes that had seen generations of fighting bulls grow and die. He wore a brown felt hat that had seen better days, a blue and beige checkered shirt rolled up to his elbows, thick, cotton trousers and worn leather boots that still retained the reddish dust of the Cordoban pastures. The contrast was stark. As he walked across the spotless white marble floor, his steps resonated like an intrusion. His boots left faint, almost imperceptible traces of dust, causing a cleaning staff member to frown discreetly. "Excuse me," George murmured, with that Andalusian accent that spread like honey over his words. The woman forced a smile and continued her work. George adjusted his old leather satchel under his arm. It was an anachronistic object in that space of immaculate modernity, worn leather with the initials GH fire-stamped in one corner, fastened with a strap that had been replaced at least twice. Inside, he carried something heavy, something important. Auto Palace's main showroom was a space designed to impress. Lighting was strategically arranged so that each vehicle shone like a displayed jewel. A black Lamborghini Aventador absorbed the light like a hole in space. Beside it, a red Ferrari 812 Superfast seemed to vibrate even when motionless. Further on, a snow-white Rolls-Royce Ghost rested with the silent dignity of royalty. George stopped in front of the Ferrari, his eyes tracing the impossible curves of the body. He extended his hand, calloused and marked by years of hard labor, and let it hover millimeters from the paint without touching it, like someone about to caress something alive. From the central counter, 3 employees observed the scene with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. One of them, Michael Vance, a man about 35, hair perfectly slicked with gel, bespoke navy suit and Italian silk tie, separated from the group after exchanging knowing glances with his colleagues. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" Michael asked, approaching with measured steps and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. George turned slowly, studying the salesman with a calm gaze. "I'm looking for a car," he replied simply, his voice deep but soft like deep water. Michael crossed his arms over his chest, the posture of someone who has already judged and sentenced. "Any particular model you're interested in?" he continued, with a tone that suggested any answer would be incorrect. "Perhaps 2, George added, undaunted, or 3, depending." Michael's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. A brief, barely contained laugh escaped his lips. "Forgive my boldness, but these vehicles," he made a sweeping gesture with his hand, "are not exactly for everyone. The Ferrari you were looking at costs over 400,000 euros. George nodded slowly, as if considering the price of a kilo of potatoes at the market. "And the Lamborghini?" he asked, pointing with a flick of his chin toward the black vehicle. 520,000, Michael replied, no longer concealing his condescension. "But we do have used models, more appropriate for certain profiles." Just then, an elegant couple entered the dealership. The woman, wrapped in a beige cashmere coat and discreet but evidently expensive jewelry, slid her gaze over George and then leaned toward her companion, whispering something. The man suppressed a smile and nodded. Michael caught the exchange, and as if the presence of suitable customers gave him more confidence, added, Perhaps I can show you some more modest vehicles we have in the other showroom. George remained impassive. His eyes, which had seen hundreds of animals born and die, which knew the true value of things, settled on the salesman with a quiet intensity. "I'd like to see the Rolls-Royce too," he said, walking toward the white vehicle without waiting for a response. The elegant couple was now observing openly, with that mix of curiosity and superiority of those enjoying an unscheduled show. "Looks like a lost farmer," the woman whispered, loud enough for George to hear. George let the words bounce off him without penetration. Had heard worse. Words, like the wind, could only knock down what lacked firm roots. Meanwhile, another salesman discreetly approached Michael. "Do you need me to call security?" he asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "It won't be necessary. He'll leave when he understands he's out of place." But George showed no signs of wanting to leave. On the contrary, he was now meticulously examining the interior of the Rolls-Royce, nodding to himself as if making important decisions. "How much is this?" "One," he asked without turning around. 380,000 euros, Michael replied, approaching. "But I'm afraid we're wasting time, both yours and mine." George finally turned to him. For the first time, a slight smile appeared on his lips, a smile that contained something Michael couldn't decipher. "Time is never wasted when you know what you're looking for," George said, and opened his leather satchel. The silence in Auto Palace grew denser as George pulled a bulky envelope. From his old satchel, he held it for a moment between his hands, as if evaluating its weight, and then placed it on the glass counter with a fluid movement that denoted familiarity with decisive gestures. Michael looked at the envelope with a mixture of confusion and persistent disdain. The elegant couple who had entered minutes earlier had drawn closer, attracted by the scene like moths to a flame, maintaining a distance that allowed them to observe without getting involved. "Cash payment," George said, his voice as calm as water in a deep pond. "I want the Ferrari." An uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Michael forced a tight smile, half incredulity, half mockery. "Sir, these vehicles aren't bought like one acquires a goat at the market," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone that barely concealed his condescension. "There are procedures, financing, paperwork." George slid the envelope toward Michael. "I want the Lamborghini too," he added, as if he hadn't heard. The objection. "And the Rolls." Michael's nervous laughter echoed through the minimalist space of the dealership. Are you joking, right?" he asked, but the certainty in his voice was beginning to crack. "I don't usually joke when it comes to business," George replied, his hazel eyes fixed on Michael's with a serene intensity that made the salesman swallow hard. Just then, a man about 50, dressed in an impeccable dark grey suit and fine-rimmed glasses, emerged from an elevated glass office overlooking the main showroom. Dr. Arthur Jenkins, the director of Auto Palace, had been observing the scene with growing interest from his privileged position. "Michael," he called, as he descended the stairs with the studied elegance of someone who knows they are being watched. "Is there a problem?" Michael turned, relieved by the interruption. "The gentleman is interested in 3 vehicles, Dr. Jenkins. I was explaining the procedures and—" Arthur Jenkins raised a hand, silencing Michael with a gesture. He approached George, quickly assessing him with experienced eyes. Where Michael had seen only worn clothes and dusty boots, Jenkins perceived something more. Perhaps it was the way George held his gaze without blinking, or maybe that calm granted only by the certainty of knowing one's own worth. "Dr. Arthur Jenkins," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Director of Auto Palace. How can we assist you?" George shook the offered hand with a firm but non-aggressive grip. "George Harrison," he replied. "I'm interested in acquiring 3 vehicles today." Jenkins nodded slowly, maintaining his professional expression. "Mr. Harrison, those 3 vehicles exceed 1 million euros. George retrieved his satchel and took out several carefully folded documents. He unfolded them onto the counter. They were bank statements with recent stamps and signatures. "If you prefer, we can do the transaction right now," he said, pointing to the papers. "My bank is informed and prepared for the immediate transfer." Jenkins critically examined the documents, his eyebrows raised slightly, the only visible sign of his surprise. Michael, leaning discreetly over his superior's shoulder, visibly paled upon seeing the figures. "Of course, Mr. Harrison," Jenkins said, quickly regaining his composure. "Michael, please prepare the documentation for the 3 vehicles while I accompany Mr. Harrison to my office to discuss the details." The director's tone was now unmistakably deferential. Michael nodded mechanically and walked away, throwing confused glances at George as he headed to his workstation. The elegant couple who had been observing exchanged looks of astonishment. The woman discreetly approached another salesman. "Who is that man?" she asked quietly. The salesman shook his head. "I have no idea, madam, but it seems he just bought 3 of our best cars." Meanwhile, Jenkins guided George toward the stairs leading to his office. Midway, he stopped and turned to the rest of the staff. "James, coffee for Mr. Harrison and myself in my office, please. And Clara, bring the customization catalogue for the gentleman." The atmosphere in the dealership had subtly changed. The same employees who had looked at George with disdain minutes earlier were now moving with professional efficiency to attend to him. The looks were no longer mocking, but ones of curiosity and newly discovered respect. In the glass-walled office, George took a seat opposite Jenkins's desk. From that position, he could observe the entire main showroom, where Michael was now hastily gathering documents, his body language completely transformed. "I must admit, Mr. Harrison, it's not common for someone to acquire 3 vehicles of this category in a single visit," Jenkins commented while tidying some papers. "May I ask what your profession is?" George watched the hustle below for a moment before answering. "I'm a livestock farmer," he said simply, without elaborating. Jenkins waited for a more detailed explanation that didn't come. He cleared his throat slightly. "A farmer," he repeated, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "Yes," George confirmed, and added with the same simplicity, "I have a bull farm in Cordoba." Before Jenkins could inquire further, the office door opened and Clara entered with a luxurious leather-bound catalogue, followed by James with a coffee tray on fine china. "Thank you," George said to both employees, with a genuine warmth that contrasted with the mechanical courtesy they usually received. As Clara placed the catalogue on the desk, her eyes briefly met George's. She smiled at him, a real smile, not the one rehearsed for customers. She had recognized something in this man that expensive suits couldn't buy: authenticity. Downstairs, Michael watched the scene from his station, his face a mixture of confusion and bewilderment. How was it possible that this man, looking like he'd stepped directly out of the field, was about to take 3 vehicles most people could only dream of? The glass doors of the dealership opened again, and a man about 40 entered with a determined stride. Mark Phillips, a representative of a prestigious classic car auction house, carried a black leather briefcase and wore an impeccable light grey suit. His gaze scanned the showroom, pausing first at the display vehicles and then at the elevated office where George was talking with Jenkins. And then it happened. Mark's face lit up with recognition. A wide, genuine smile appeared on his face as he exclaimed, loud enough for the entire showroom to hear, "I can't believe it. Mr. George Harrison, what a surprise to find you here in Madrid." Mark Phillips's voice resonated throughout the Auto Palace showroom, bouncing off the polished surfaces and gleaming glass. Every head turned to him, and then, following his gaze, to the figure of George Harrison in Dr. Jenkins's glass-walled office. Mark ascended the stairs 2 steps at a time, with the energy of someone about to greet an old friend, or perhaps more precisely, someone whose favor he greatly valued. Jenkins, confused by this sudden interruption but aware of professional etiquette, rose to greet the newcomer. "Mr. Harrison!" Mark exclaimed upon entering the office, extending both hands toward the farmer. "What an honor to find you here. The last time was at the Seville auction, remember? You took home that 1954 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing." George calmly stood up and shook Mark's hands with a discreet but warm smile. "Mr. Phillips," he greeted, "a pleasure to see you again." Jenkins observed the exchange with growing interest, trying to mentally recalibrate his perception of this unexpected client. "Do you know each other?" he asked, alternating his gaze between the 2 men. Mark let out a burst of incredulous laughter. "Know him?" he repeated, as if the question were absurd. "Dr. Jenkins, you have before you Mr. George Harrison Dominguez, the largest breeder of fighting bulls in Andalusia. His specimens have been fought in the most important bull rings in Spain, France, and Latin America." Jenkins's expression subtly changed, a mix of sudden understanding and a certain professional embarrassment for not having recognized the name. Downstairs, the staff and customers had stopped pretending they weren't listening. Michael, who was preparing the contracts, froze, his pen suspended over the paper. "Mr. Harrison isn't just a farmer," Mark continued enthusiastically. "His classic car collection is one of the most impressive in Europe. The Mercedes I mentioned is just one piece of his private museum. How many vehicles do you have in your collection now, Mr. Harrison? 30? 40? George made a modest gesture with his hand. I don't keep count, he replied simply, although his eyes revealed that the exact count was not a detail that escaped him. They're just objects, after all. Mark turned to Jenkins, leaning in slightly like someone sharing a secret that everyone should know. This man has animals worth more than all the cars in this room combined, he said, with a tone of almost religious reverence. His stud bull Lightning was sold to a Mexican farm for a sum that would make the price of your most exclusive Lamborghini pale. The silence in the dealership was now absolute. Clara, who had remained nearby to assist if necessary, watched the scene with a barely contained smile, especially upon seeing Michael's astonished expression from below. George, visibly uncomfortable being the center of attention, sat down again and steered the conversation toward more pragmatic ground. I was about to finalize the purchase of 3 vehicles, he said, addressing Jenkins. Perhaps Mr. Phillips can advise me on the Rolls-Royce. You have a good eye for detail, don't you? Mark nodded enthusiastically, clearly flattered by the consultation. Of course, Mr. Harrison. It would be an honor. Jenkins, regaining his professional composure, nodded vigorously. Of course. In fact, allow me to offer you our VIP room to continue with the transaction. Michael, he called, raising his voice so the salesman could hear him, bring the contracts to the Platinum Room, please, and inform the delivery department to prepare the 3 vehicles for today. Michael, whose face had gone through a whole range of expressions in the last few minutes, nodded mechanically and began gathering the documents with slightly trembling hands. As the small group headed toward the VIP room, a discreet but luxuriously furnished room in the back of the dealership, George noticed how the looks followed him. They were no longer looks of disdain or mockery, but ones of curiosity and newly discovered respect. The same elegant couple who had whispered about his appearance earlier now subtly tried to get closer, as if they had suddenly discovered they shared the same social circle. Once in the Platinum Room, with its dark wood-paneled walls, genuine leather armchairs, and a discreet display case with premium spirits, Jenkins closed the door, isolating them from the external bustle. Mr. Harrison, he began, with a completely different tone than the one he had initially used, I must apologize if there was any misunderstanding at the beginning. At Auto Palace, we pride ourselves on offering exceptional service to exceptional clients like yourself. George contemplated the director for a moment, his eyes revealing that he perfectly understood the situation. There's nothing to apologize for, Dr. Jenkins, he finally replied. Each of us interprets what we see according to what we know. Mark, who had been examining the spirit's display case, turned with a knowing smile. That's one of the reasons Mr. Harrison is so respected in our circle, he commented. His wisdom goes beyond business. There was a discreet knock at the door, and Michael entered carrying a leather folder with the contracts. His face was the living image of regret and discomfort. The contracts, Dr. Jenkins, he said, avoiding looking directly at George. Thank you, Michael, Jenkins replied, taking the folder. Is everything in order for immediate delivery? Yes, sir, Michael confirmed. The technical department is performing final checks. The 3 vehicles will be ready in approximately 1 hour. Excellent, Jenkins smiled, showing a perfect row of white teeth. Mr. Harrison, if you allow me, we will review the contracts together. Can I offer you something in the meantime, coffee perhaps? Or would you prefer something stronger? George gently shook his head. Water will be fine. Thank you. Michael hurried to the filtered water dispenser in the corner of the room, pouring a glass with hands that betrayed his nervousness. As he handed it to George, their eyes met for the first time since the farmer's true identity had been revealed. Thank you, young man, George said, with a voice that contained neither a trace of resentment nor superiority. Michael nodded slightly, his throat suddenly dry. You're welcome, Mr. Harrison. You can go, Michael, Jenkins instructed. I will personally handle the rest. The salesman nodded and headed for the door, but before he could leave, George's voice stopped him. Michael, the farmer called, are you a good driver? The question, unexpected and seemingly out of context, made Michael turn back with a confused expression. Yes, sir. Of course. George nodded thoughtfully. Good. I might need your help with something later. Michael, puzzled but not daring to ask more, nodded and left the room, closing the door behind him. Once the 3 men were alone, George leaned forward, his hands crossed on his knees. "Now, Dr. Jenkins," he said with a voice that indicated they were moving to the serious part of the business, "let's review those contracts. And then I want to talk about something more important than these cars." The Platinum Room at Auto Palace, with its dim, strategic lighting, turned every surface into a stage where details were revealed with surgical precision. On the polished mahogany table, the purchase contracts were spread out like maps of unexplored territory. George reviewed them with the meticulousness of someone who has signed multi-million-dollar agreements for decades, his eyes pausing on every clause, every number, every piece of small print. Dr. Jenkins watched with a mixture of professional admiration and barely contained curiosity. This man, with his simple clothes and hands calloused by sun and work, demonstrated a business acumen that belied any stereotype. Mark Phillips, meanwhile, had settled into a nearby armchair, pouring himself an 18-year-old whiskey from the display case, observing the scene like someone enjoying a private show. "Everything seems to be in order," George finally said, after reviewing the last page. "But I have a question about the after-sales service. How do the inspections work if the cars will be in Cordoba?" Jenkins, prepared for this query, unfolded an additional brochure. "We have an agreement with a specialized workshop in Cordoba, Mr. Harrison. For clients like you, we offer pickup and delivery service. A certified technician will collect the vehicle from your farm for any maintenance and return it once finished." George nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. He took the pen Jenkins offered him and signed the 3 contracts with surprisingly elegant calligraphy, a fluid stroke that denoted formal education and years of practice. "Perfect," Jenkins concluded, collecting the signed documents. "As soon as the bank transfer is verified, the vehicles will officially be yours." George pulled out his mobile phone, a recent model but with a worn leather case that matched his satchel. He made a brief call. "Anthony, proceed with the 3 transfers we discussed this morning," he said simply, and hung up without further ceremony. Jenkins smiled widely. "Excellent. While we await confirmation, allow me to offer you a guided tour of our facilities. We have some exclusive models in our private showroom that might interest you for future acquisitions." George gently shook his head. "Perhaps another time," he said, and then looked directly at Jenkins. "Now, I'd like to talk about that more important matter I mentioned." The director of Auto Palace raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Of course, I am completely at your disposal." George leaned back, in his seat, his hands resting quietly on the arms of the leather armchair. "I need a driver," he said simply. "Someone who can take the 3 cars to my farm in Cordoba." Jenkins nodded quickly. "Of course, we can arrange that. Our delivery service—" "No," George interrupted firmly but not rudely. "I want Michael." A charged silence invaded the room. Mark, who had been a discreet observer until that moment, stifled a laugh into his whiskey glass. Jenkins blinked several times, processing the request. "Michael?" he repeated as if he hadn't understood correctly. "Our salesman?" "Exactly," George confirmed. "I want him to drive the cars to Cordoba. Today, if possible." The confusion on Jenkins's face was evident. "But Mr. Harrison, Michael is one of our best salesmen, not a driver. Plus, he would have to return to Madrid afterward." "I will pay him generously for the service and for his time," George clarified. "And I can provide transportation for his return to Madrid. It is a personal request." Mark, who knew George better, intervened with a knowing smile. "Dr. Jenkins, when Mr. Harrison makes a personal request, there is usually a good reason behind it. And believe me, in the long run, it always proves beneficial to attend to it." Jenkins, caught between the strangeness of the request and the desire to please a client who had just spent over €1,000,000, finally nodded. "Of course, I will speak with him immediately." "I would prefer to do it myself," George said. "Alone, if you don't mind." A minute later, Michael entered the Platinum Room again, his face a mix of confusion and apprehension. Jenkins and Mark had left, leaving George alone, standing by the window that overlooked the dealership's rear patio, where the 3 newly acquired vehicles shone under the late Madrid sun. Did you call for me, Mr. Harrison?" Michael asked, his former arrogance completely evaporated. George turned slowly. The light entering through the window created a backlight that defined his silhouette, giving him an almost mythical appearance. "Yes, Michael, I have a proposal for you." The salesman approached cautiously, like someone approaching an unpredictable animal. "I need you to drive my 3 new cars to my farm in Cordoba," George continued. Today, I will pay you €5,000 for the service, and you will have transportation back to Madrid tomorrow. Michael's eyes widened. 5,000, he began, but cut himself off, suspecting some kind of trap or elaborate revenge. Mr. Harrison, I must apologize again for my behavior earlier. I didn't know who you were and... George raised a hand, silencing him with a gentle gesture. It's not necessary, young man. I am not offering you this as a punishment or to humiliate you. Then why me? Michael asked, genuinely confused. George smiled slightly, a smile that contained decades of experience and wisdom. Because I think it could be educational for both of us. Before Michael could ask more, the door opened and Clara entered with an electronic tablet. Mr. Harrison, the transfer has been confirmed, she announced with a professional smile. The vehicles are ready for delivery. Thank you, Clara, George replied, and then looked at Michael. So, do you accept my proposal? Michael, caught between confusion, curiosity, and the professional impossibility of refusing such an important client, slowly nodded. Yes, Mr. Harrison, I accept. Excellent, George concluded. We will leave in half an hour. I have a few matters to attend to first. As Michael left, visibly affected by this unexpected turn of events, George looked back out the window. The 3 luxury vehicles gleamed, perfect and promising. But his mind was elsewhere, on the open fields of Cordoba, in the smell of wet earth after the rain, in the sound of bulls' hooves on fresh grass. In the Auto Palace reception, news of George's identity and his multi-million-euro acquisition had spread like wildfire. The same employees who had exchanged mocking glances were now speaking in reverent whispers. The elegant couple who had entered earlier discreetly tried to find out more details. Their initial disdain transformed into an almost obsessive interest. Dr. Jenkins, aware of the importance of this newly discovered client, had ordered a small impromptu reception to be prepared for the vehicle delivery. Champagne, canapes, and a photographer included. But when the time for delivery came, George surprised everyone once more. He politely declined the celebration, ignored the photographers, and with the same calm with which he had entered hours earlier, headed directly for the white Rolls-Royce. Michael, still processing his new and unexpected mission, waited beside the vehicles with a small, hastily packed travel bag. I'll drive the Rolls, George said, opening the driver's door. You'll take the Ferrari first. We'll stop in Toledo so you can try the Lamborghini too. The Auto Palace employees watched the scene with a mixture of astonishment and new understanding. This man, who had seemed so out of place among the polished luxury of the dealership, was now revealing his true dimension. The Rolls-Royce Ghost glided along the A4 motorway with the silent majesty of a white cloud moving across the sky. Behind it, the red Ferrari, driven by Michael, maintained a respectful distance, its engine occasionally roaring when a clear stretch briefly allowed its contained power to be released. The Rolls' interior was a sanctuary of handcrafted luxury, hand-perforated leather, fine woods, polished metal. Nevertheless, George drove with the same naturalness with which he would drive a tractor across the fields of his farm. His hands, marked by years of outdoor work, rested lightly on the polished wooden steering wheel. Michael watched from the Ferrari as the bull breeder seemed perfectly comfortable both in these extreme luxury vehicles and in his simple clothes. It was a contradiction that continued to challenge his understanding of the world. As Madrid faded behind them and the landscape gradually transformed, buildings giving way to increasingly open fields, George adjusted the rearview mirror, contemplating his own reflection for an instant before refocusing on the road. After an hour of travel, they stopped at a modernly designed service station. Michael, still visibly tense, parked the Ferrari next to the Rolls-Royce and got out with the stiffness of someone who has been holding their breath without realizing it. "Everything good with the car?" George asked as he approached. "Amazing," Michael replied, with an involuntary smile. "I've never driven anything like it. It's like the car knows what you want before you even know it yourself," George completed, nodding understandingly. "That's how a good tool should be, an extension of the user." Michael nodded, surprised by the accuracy of the description. "We'll have some coffee," George decided, pointing toward the station's cafeteria. "We still have a way to go." In the modern cafeteria, with its designer chairs and deliberately casual lighting, the two men represented a contrast that attracted discreet glances. George, in his country clothes and calm demeanor, and Michael in his expensive but now somewhat wrinkled salesman's suit and his expression of permanent bewilderment. "Mr. Harrison," Michael began after they were served coffee, "I want to apologize again for my behavior at the dealership. I was disrespectful and—" George raised a hand, interrupting him gently. "Don't apologize for what's already past, young man. What matters is what we learn from every encounter." "Even so," Michael insisted, "I'm ashamed of how I treated you. I didn't know who you were." George took a sip of his coffee, his hazel eyes studying Michael over the rim of the cup. "And would that have changed anything?" he finally asked. "If you had known who I was from the start, would you have treated me differently?" Michael looked down at his coffee, unable to maintain eye contact. "Of course," he admitted, and then, with an honesty that surprised even himself, added, "That's my job, to treat customers according to their buying capacity." "And do you think that's the right way to treat people?" The question hung in the air between them, simple but charged with meaning. Michael didn't answer immediately, taking a sip of coffee to buy time while he reflected. "It's how the world works," he finally said, with less conviction than he intended. "Especially in my business." George nodded slowly, as if considering the answer from multiple angles. "You know, Michael, in my business it's different," he said, looking out the window toward the field stretching beyond the motorway. "A fighting bull doesn't know if its breeder wears Armani or work clothes. It doesn't respond to status, money, or appearances. It responds to the truth." Michael frowned slightly, trying to decipher the meaning behind the words. "I'm not sure I understand," he admitted. George smiled, a serene smile that illuminated his weathered face. "You will understand," he assured. "When we get to the farm, finish your coffee. We still have to stop in Toledo to switch cars." Toledo rose in the distance, like a medieval dream carved in stone and time, its silhouette outlined against the afternoon sky. They parked the vehicles in a space reserved especially for them on the outskirts of the city, where an older man in a leather cap waited patiently beside a dark green Land Rover. "Mark," George greeted, affectionately embracing the man. "Thanks for coming." "Mr. Harrison," Mark replied, with a deference that seemed not forced but natural, born of genuine respect. "Everything is prepared as you asked." Michael watched the scene from a distance, still trying to fit all the pieces of this puzzle called George Harrison together. "Michael," George called, "you will drive the Lamborghini now. Mark will take the Ferrari to the farm. I need you to experience all three cars to understand something important." The vehicle swap was performed efficiently. As Michael settled into the Lamborghini's seat, feeling the machine's latent power beneath him, George approached his window. "A piece of advice," he said, leaning in slightly. "It's not just power, it's balance. Feel the car, don't force it." The unusual convoy, a Rolls-Royce, a Lamborghini and a Ferrari, driven by a man who looked like a rural foreman, resumed the journey south. Michael discovered that the Lamborghini was a different beast from the Ferrari, more aggressive, more temperamental, demanding greater concentration and respect. As they drove, the landscape changed. Cultivated fields gave way to dehisas, expanses of scattered holm oaks and cork oaks over pastures, the perfect habitat for the fighting bull. When they finally took a detour onto a dirt road, marked only by a discreet sign that read, Ortega Bull Farm, Michael realized they were entering another world. The dirt road, though well-maintained, caused Michael to instinctively reduce speed. The Lamborghini, designed for perfect asphalt, protested slightly at every irregularity. After several kilometers, the road culminated in a rise from which the farm could be viewed in its entirety. George stopped the Rolls-Royce and got out, gesturing for Michael to do the same. The spectacle was overwhelming. Acres of dehesa stretched as far as the eye could, see with groups of black bulls scattered across the pastures. In the center, a complex of white buildings with red tile roofs was grouped around a central courtyard. Beyond, modern facilities for handling livestock harmonized with the traditional landscape. "Welcome to my home, Michael," George said, his voice mixing with the wind that gently stirred the holm oaks. Michael remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what he saw. It wasn't just the expanse of land or the beauty of the place that impressed him. It was the feeling that everything he observed was part of something bigger, something with purpose and tradition. "It's impressive," he finally managed to articulate. George nodded, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows the true value of what they own. 5 generations of my family have worked this land, he explained. It's not just about breeding bulls, Michael. It's about preserving something important, something that goes beyond ourselves. They resumed the journey toward the main house. As they approached, Michael could distinguish figures moving in the courtyard, workers finishing their day's tasks, sheepdogs trotting alongside their masters, the organized bustle of a well-managed operation. When the 3 luxury vehicles entered the cobblestone courtyard, the activity momentarily ceased. Curious eyes watched the unusual procession, but without the surprise Michael would have expected. It was as if the people of the farm were accustomed to their patron's eccentricities. They parked in front of the main house, a traditional Andalusian construction with tastefully integrated modern elements. The front door opened, and a woman about 50, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun and a simple but evidently quality dress, came out to greet them. "Clara," George greeted, embracing her affectionately. "This is Michael Vance. He'll be staying with us for a couple of days." "Welcome, Mr. Vance," Clara said, with a genuine warmth Michael hadn't experienced in Madrid for a long time. "Your room is prepared. You must be tired after the journey." As a group of workers discreetly took charge of the vehicles, Michael was guided inside the house. The contrast with his minimalist apartment in Madrid couldn't have been greater. Here, every piece of furniture, every object seemed to tell a story. Old photographs in silver frames, bullfighting trophies, paintings of legendary bulls, and Andalusian landscapes. It wasn't ostentation, but the natural accumulation of a life rich in experiences and traditions. His room, spacious and comfortable, had windows overlooking an interior courtyard with a softly murmuring fountain. On the bed, perfectly folded, were clean clothes, cotton trousers, a shirt, a light sweater. Practical clothes, not designer, but of excellent quality. "Dinner will be served at 8, Clara informed him before leaving him alone. "Mr. Harrison suggests you change. The evenings can be cool here even at this time of year." Once alone, Michael approached the window. From there he could see part of the livestock facilities, and beyond, the fields where groups of bulls grazed peacefully. Magnificent animals, black as night, with a presence that seemed almost mythical, even from a distance. For the first time since accepting George's strange proposal, Michael felt something changing inside him, a sense of genuine curiosity, of openness toward something he had never considered valuable, was beginning to make its way through his certainties. The main house dining room was a cozy space, dominated by a long oak table that could easily seat 20, although tonight only 5 place settings were arranged. The walls were decorated with paintings of rural scenes and family portraits, illuminated by the warm light of a chandelier that looked several centuries old. Michael, dressed in the clothes they had left him, was the first to arrive. He felt strangely comfortable in these simple garments, so different from his bespoke Italian suits. Clara entered, carrying a pitcher of red wine. "Ah, Mr. Vance, punctual," she smiled. "Mr. Harrison will be down in a moment. Would you like some wine while you wait? It's from our own cellar." Michael accepted with curiosity. The wine, served in a simple but elegant glass, had an intense aroma of ripe fruit and earth. "It's excellent," he commented after tasting it, genuinely surprised. Clara nodded, pleased. "Everything produced on this farm has something special," she said with the quiet pride of someone who knows the true value of things. "Mr. Harrison always says that it's the land that determines the quality. We only accompany the process." George appeared at that moment, accompanied by a young man about 30, who bore a certain resemblance to him. "Michael," the farmer greeted, "this is my son, Alexander. He just returned from university in Salamanca. He's finishing his doctorate in biology." Alexander extended his hand with a frank smile. He was dressed similarly to his father, though with a more contemporary flair. "A pleasure," he said. "My father told me about you and the 3 new cars. Impressive." Before Michael could reply, an older man, about 70, entered with slow but firm steps. His face showed the wisdom and tranquility granted only by decades lived with purpose. "And this is my father, Mr. Patrick," George introduced with evident respect, "the true master of this house." The elderly man shook Michael's hand with surprising strength for his age. "Welcome to our home," he said, with that natural dignity that needs no pomp or circumstance. "I hope you find your stay instructive." Something in the way he pronounced that last word, made Michael feel that there was more meaning than appeared, as if everyone shared a secret that he still didn't know. Dinner was served by Clara and a younger woman introduced as Eleanor, Alexander's wife. The dishes, simple but exquisitely prepared, consisted of products from the farm itself: knife-cut Iberian ham, cured cheese, seasonal vegetables, and grilled roast meat. "Everything we eat here is ours," Mr. Patrick explained, noticing Michael's appreciation for the food. 50 years ago, my father taught me something I never forgot. He who depends on his own land never goes hungry." The conversation flowed naturally. To Michael's surprise, they didn't talk about luxury cars, or sales, or status. They talked about the drought threatening the pastures, the new breeding methods they were testing, Alexander's studies on bovine genetics, agrarian policy. As dinner progressed, Michael found himself participating more and more, genuinely interested in topics he would never have considered relevant in his life in Madrid. "So, Michael," George finally said when desserts were served, "what do you think of our little world?" Michael considered the question for a moment, surprised to feel the need to answer honestly. "It's different from everything I know," he admitted. "In Madrid, my life revolves around appearances, around what things represent rather than what they are. Here, everything seems to have a real purpose." Mr. Patrick nodded, as if the answer confirmed something he already knew. "The problem with appearances," the elderly man said, with the paused cadence of someone who has thought deeply about the subject, "is that when they become the center of your life, they take you away from what truly matters." "And what truly matters, Mr. Patrick?" Michael asked with a curiosity that surprised himself. "The truth," the elderly man replied simply. "Living in the truth, being useful, leaving something better than you found it." George watched Michael intently, evaluating the impact of his father's words. "Tomorrow," he finally said, "I'd like you to accompany me. I want to show you something important." The sunrise over the Cordoban de Hesse painted the sky with coppery and golden tones when Michael was awakened by a gentle knock on his door. Eleanor, George's daughter-in-law, informed him that breakfast would be served in 15 minutes and that Mr. Harrison would wait for him afterward in the courtyard. After a simple but substantial breakfast of fresh-baked bread, virgin olive oil, Iberian ham and black coffee, Michael found George in the main courtyard. The farmer was dressed in work clothes, sturdy cotton trousers, tall leather boots, and a long-sleeved shirt rolled up to his elbows. His felt hat, faithful companion, rested on his head. "Good morning, Michael," George greeted. "I hope you rested well. Today you will get to know the essence of our work." They began walking toward the stables, where several workers were already busy with their morning tasks. The fresh air carried aromas of damp earth, freshly cut grass, and the unmistakable animal smell that, far from being unpleasant, conveyed a sense of authenticity and life. "First, we will see the selection," George explained as they walked, between immaculately maintained white buildings. "It is perhaps the most important time of the year for us." In a wide circular corral, several mounted workers separated calves under Alexander's watchful supervision. Their movements showed years of practice, a coordinated dance between men and animals that seemed to follow an ancestral rhythm. "Observe how each person knows exactly their place," George pointed out. "There are no unnecessary shouts, no confusion, no sudden movements, only mutual. A respect and deep knowledge." Michael nodded, perceiving the almost military precision of the operation. Every worker, every horse, every calf seemed to understand its role in that ballet of tradition and technique. "What exactly are they doing?" he asked, genuinely interested. "We are selecting the specimens for the next season," George explained. "Each animal is evaluated for its physical conformation, its behavior, its courage, and its lineage. A mistake here would cost years of work and could compromise our prestige." For more than an hour they observed the process. George patiently explained every detail, every decision, every tradition maintained for generations. He didn't speak like a boss giving orders, but like a master sharing wisdom, with respect for both the animals and the men who worked with them. Finally, George guided Michael toward a particular calf, an imposing black specimen that watched calmly from one end of the corral, already separated from the main group. "This is Little Lightning," he said with evident pride. "A direct descendant of Lightning, our most valuable stud bull. Look at his gaze, the way he holds his head high, even when he is still. Nobility is not bought, Michael. It is inherited or earned. Michael looked at the animal with new eyes. He had never considered that a bull could possess qualities like nobility or pride. In his world, these characteristics were reserved for people with bloated bank accounts and expensive suits. He's impressive, he finally admitted. He's worth more than any of the cars we bought yesterday, George stated simply. Not for what we could get by selling him, but for what he represents for the future of the farm. As the morning progressed, they visited different areas of the farm. The pastures where adult bulls grazed freely, the veterinary facilities equipped with cutting-edge technology, the barns where the feed produced on the property itself was stored. In every place, George greeted the workers by name, asked about their families and inquired about their concerns. Most of these people, he explained as they walked among century-old holm oaks, are children and grandchildren of those who worked with my father and grandfather. They know this land as well as I do. Without them, none of this would exist. Michael, accustomed to the high staff turnover in the corporate world, where employees were replaceable numbers, found this labor relationship almost incomprehensible in its depth and mutual loyalty. It's a different way of doing business, he commented, as they stopped beside a watering trough where several bulls were drinking peacefully. George smiled slightly. It's not just a business, Michael. It's a way of life. When my great-grandfather started with just a few acres and 5 cows, he didn't dream of private jets or yachts. He dreamed of creating something valuable that could endure, something that honored the land and the animals. The sun reached its zenith. When they arrived at a hill from which a large part of the farm could be seen, George stopped, taking off his hat for a moment to feel the breeze on his face. "Tell me, Michael, what do you see?" he asked, pointing with a sweeping gesture at the landscape that stretched out before them. Michael contemplated the green fields dotted with holm oaks, the groups of black bulls scattered like ink blots on a canvas, the white buildings harmoniously grouped, the workers moving with clear purpose. "I say a perfectly coordinated operation," he finally replied. "A system that works like clockwork." George nodded, pleased with the answer. "That is exactly what my father taught me to see. Not land, not animals, not buildings. A coherent whole where every part has its purpose and its dignity." The day continued with an exhaustive tour of the farm. Michael, accustomed to Italian shoes on polished marble, now walked in borrowed boots on reddish earth, crossing streams, climbing hills, traversing pastures. His hands, used to holding luxury catalogues and contracts, now touched wooden fences, tree bark, work tools. At noon, under the shade of a century-old holm oak that George claimed had been planted by his grandfather, they shared a lunch prepared by the farm workers. Freshly baked bread, virgin olive oil from the farm, cured ham from their own drying rooms, and red wine served in simple glasses. "Do you know how much this ham is worth in a Madrid restaurant?" George asked as he cut another slice with his pocket knife. Michael nodded. "Several €100 a kilo for the good ones." "And here it is simply our daily food," George observed. "The difference between price and value, young man. An important lesson." Michael chewed slowly, savoring the ham that indeed surpassed in quality any he had tasted in Madrid's most exclusive restaurants. "I had never thought of it that way," he admitted. "In my world, price and value are practically synonymous." George gently shook his head. "That is perhaps the greatest deception of modern life," he said, "confusing what something costs with what something is worth. My grandfather used to say that the price is set by the market, but the value is determined by life." The conversation flowed naturally as they ate. To Michael's surprise, he discovered that George had studied agricultural engineering in Madrid and economics in London before returning to the family farm. He spoke 3 languages fluently and was aware of the latest technological developments in sustainable livestock farming. "Tradition without knowledge becomes superstition," George explained when Michael expressed his surprise. "And knowledge without tradition lacks roots. We need both." In the afternoon, they visited the small family museum set up in one of the outbuildings. Sepia photographs showed 5 generations of the Harrison family, alongside legendary bulls and bullfighting personalities. Posters of historical bullfights in which the farm's specimens had participated, trophies and awards accumulated over more than a century. In a special display case protected from dust and light, rested an old leather satchel almost identical to the one George had carried to the dealership. "This belonged to my grandfather," George explained in a quiet voice. He used it to buy the first additional acres of this farm, when we barely had enough to live on. I carry it with me every time I make an important purchase, to remember where we come from, and to keep my feet on the ground. Michael looked at the family relic with new understanding, now realizing that what he had judged as simple carelessness in clothing was actually a deep connection to roots, a symbol of values that transcended fashions and appearances. At nightfall, they returned to the main house. Michael was physically exhausted, but mentally stimulated in a way he hadn't been in years. Every muscle in his body protested the unusual effort, but he felt a strange satisfaction, as if he had participated in something genuinely meaningful. After a revitalizing shower, he joined the family for dinner. The conversation now revolved around plans for the next season, the challenges of climate change for livestock farming, the growing demand for fighting bull meat in certain international markets. Michael, to his own surprise, found himself actively participating, asking relevant questions, even offering perspectives from his experience in luxury marketing that seemed to interest Alexander for the international promotion of the farm. "You have good ideas, Michael," commented Mr. Patrick, the patriarch, when the salesman suggested strategies for positioning the Harrison brand in premium markets. "Sometimes you need an outside perspective to see opportunities that are right in front of us." The compliment, coming from that man of few words, evoked a pride in Michael that he hadn't felt with any million-dollar sale at Auto Palace. That night, after dinner, George invited Michael for a drink on the terrace. The Andalusian night sky displayed a blanket of stars impossible to contemplate in Madrid, where light pollution erased all that magnificence. "Tomorrow you'll go back to the city," George said, as he poured 2 glasses of an aged cognac saved for special occasions. "But first I'd like to know what you think of all this." Honestly, Michael contemplated his glass, searching for the right words to express the transformation that had begun to occur in him during these 24 hours. "I think I understand why you brought me here," he finally replied, "to show me that I judged incorrectly, that appearances are deceiving." George smiled slightly, swirling the cognac in his glass to release its aroma. "That's part of it, but not all of it." He took a sip before continuing. "Michael, do you know why I have a collection of luxury cars?" The question surprised the salesman. "I suppose because you can afford them, as a symbol of status." "Perhaps." George gently shook his head. "I collect them because I admire excellence," he explained. "The technical perfection, the passion of those who design and build them. The same thing I look for in my bulls, the tangible manifestation of a vision taken to its maximum expression, but I never confuse the object with its true value." A contemplative silence settled between them as the stars shone over the dark fields, where the bulls rested, invisible but present. "Last week," George continued, "I visited 3 dealerships in Madrid. In the other 2 I was received with respect regardless of my appearance. The salespeople listened to my questions, answered honestly, treated me like a human being worthy of consideration. Only at Auto Palace did I find that immediate disdain, that judgment based solely on appearances." Michael looked down at his glass, ashamed to recognize himself in that description. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I have no excuse. I didn't bring you here to shame you," George clarified in a serene voice. "I brought you because I saw something in you, potential, like when I look at a calf and see beyond its current appearance, glimpsing what it could become with the right guidance." Michael looked up, surprised by the unexpected comparison. "What exactly did you see?" George contemplated the stars for a moment before answering. "Intelligence, capacity, hunger for success," he listed. "But I also saw someone who has been molded by a system that values the wrong things, who confuses price with value, appearance with substance, possession with merit." They drank in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought as the nocturnal sounds of the dehesa, the chirping of crickets, the distant murmur of the stream, the occasional lowing of a bull composed a natural symphony. "Tomorrow you will take the 3 cars back to Madrid," George finally said, "and you will return to your life. But perhaps, just perhaps, you will see some things differently." "I already do," Michael admitted, "and I'm not sure if that makes me happy or terrifies me." George laughed softly. "That is the sign that you are truly learning something valuable." The next morning dawned clear and fresh. The 3 luxury vehicles waited in the cobblestone courtyard, shining under the early sun. An employee had meticulously cleaned them, removing the dust from the journey. Next to them, a green Land Rover with a driver waited to take Michael back to Madrid once the delivery was completed. During breakfast, George handed Michael an envelope. "Your payment for bringing the cars," he said. €5,000, as we agreed. Michael took the envelope with some discomfort. "Mr. Harrison, after everything I've learned here, it doesn't seem right to accept this money. You have already given me much more in—" George raised a hand, interrupting him. "A deal is a deal. I always honor my word," he paused. "However, I have another proposal for you." The farmer pulled a second document from his pocket and slid it onto the table. "It's a job offer," he explained. "I need someone to manage my properties in Madrid and take care of my car collection. Someone who understands both technical excellence and human values. Someone who can represent me in the capital when I can't be there personally." Michael opened the document with slightly trembling hands. It was a formal contract, drafted by lawyers. The salary offered was considerably less than his, commissions at Auto Palace, but it included housing in an apartment in central Madrid, owned by the Harrison family, and other substantial benefits: comprehensive medical insurance, limited personal use of the collection vehicles, participation in the farm's events. "Why me?" he asked, genuinely confused. "After how I treated you, there must be people much more qualified, with experience in managing car collections, with knowledge about—" "Those skills can be acquired," George interrupted. "What is not easily taught is the capacity to learn and the humility to acknowledge mistakes. You have demonstrated both qualities in these 24 hours. Michael looked at the contract again, overwhelmed by the decision before him. A complete life change, a leap into the unknown. "I don't need an answer now," George added, sensing his internal conflict. "Take the contract to Madrid, read it calmly, consult with whomever you need. You have 1 week to decide." The breakfast continued with lighter conversations. Alexander commented on a new health monitoring system for the cattle they were implementing. Clara mentioned the upcoming visit of Mexican buyers interested in acquiring stud bulls. Life on the Harrison farm followed its course, a constant flow of tradition and innovation, past and future intertwined. When it was time to leave, the whole family came out to the courtyard to say goodbye. Mr. Patrick shook Michael's hand firmly. "Remember what you've seen here, young man," the patriarch said. "Not all fortunes shine like gold, but all the worthwhile ones have deep roots." The drive back to Madrid gave Michael time to reflect. He drove the Ferrari, preceded by the Lamborghini piloted by one of George's workers and followed by the Rolls-Royce with another. The landscape gradually changed from dehisas to cultivated fields, then suburbs, and finally the urban profile of the capital. As they drove through the congested streets of Madrid, Michael observed the admiring glances the vehicles attracted. Before, those looks would have fed his ego, confirming his vision of the world. Now, strangely, they seemed superficial to him, focused on the exterior shine without understanding the true value of things. After delivering the vehicles to George's private garage in Madrid, a discreet but impeccable space in an old building in the Salamanca neighborhood, Michael was taken to his apartment. His home, which he had always considered elegant and sophisticated, now seemed cold and empty. Designer furniture without history or meaning. Walls decorated with art acquired for its investment value, not for emotional resonance. The magazines about luxury cars and expensive watches on the glass table suddenly seemed superficial. The bottle of Dom Perignon champagne in the fridge, saved for celebrating important sales, had lost its appeal. He showered and changed into his usual clothes: bespoke suit, designer shirt, gold cufflinks, Italian shoes. But as he looked at himself in the mirror, he had the strange feeling of putting on a costume, a mask that no longer fit correctly. That night, as he contemplated George's offer spread out on his dining table, he received a call from Dr. Jenkins. "Michael, you finally answered." The director's voice was overflowing with that false warmth Michael could now clearly recognize. "How was the trip? Was Mr. Harrison satisfied with the service?" "Everything went well," he replied curtly. "Excellent, excellent." Jenkins paused deliberately. "Listen, tomorrow we have an important client, a Russian businessman interested in the new Bentley Continental. I want you to handle it personally. With the commissions, you could earn over €10,000 in a single day." Michael looked at George's offer on the table. The simple paper without corporate adornments, just the direct, honest proposal. He thought of the farm, of the bulls grazing freely, of Mr. Patrick and his natural dignity, of the authenticity that breathed in every corner of that place. "I'm sorry, Dr. Jenkins," he finally said. "I won't be available tomorrow, nor any other day. I'm resigning." The silence on the other end of the line was almost comical. "What are you saying?" Jenkins' voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "Is this a joke? Or did Harrison offer you something? Because I can match any—" "It's not about money," Michael interrupted. "It's a personal decision. I will send my resignation letter tomorrow." After hanging up, Michael walked over to the window. The lights of Madrid shone in the night, beautiful but distant like artificial stars. He took George's contract, reread it one more time, and then sent a simple text message. "I accept. Thank you for the opportunity." The response came almost immediately. "Welcome to the Harrison family. Start when you're ready." 6 months later, Michael was unrecognizable, not just because of his more sober, functional clothing, but because of the tranquility in his gaze. As manager of the Harrison collection in Madrid, he had developed a genuine respect for the technical excellence of the vehicles he now cared for, finally understanding the difference between owning them and valuing them. The private garage where the collection was stored, located in a discreet building in the Salamanca neighborhood, was his new domain. 20 exceptional vehicles, from meticulously restored classics to contemporary limited edition models, each selected not for its price or exclusivity, but for its technical and historical relevance for the vision it represented. His apartment in the same building, owned by the Harrison family, was smaller than his previous home, but infinitely cozier. He had learned to value quality over ostentation, functionality over fashion, authenticity over appearances. That morning, as he prepared the Ferrari 812 Superfast for its monthly maintenance, checking fluid levels and tire pressure with the meticulousness of a surgeon, he received a call from George. "I need you to accompany me to an auction this weekend," the farmer said without preamble. "2 historic Bugattis have appeared. Mark Phillips says they are exceptional pieces." "Of course, Mr. Harrison. I will prepare everything," Michael replied, already mentally planning the necessary arrangements. "Do you need me to investigate the vehicle's provenance before the event?" "Exactly what I was going to ask you," George sounded pleased. "I trust your judgment, Michael. In these 6 months, you have demonstrated an exceptional eye for separating the genuinely valuable from the merely expensive." The auction was held at a luxury hotel in Madrid. The room was packed with wealthy collectors, celebrities, and classic car enthusiasts. Entering alongside George, Michael recognized several clients from his former dealership, including Dr. Jenkins, who looked at him with poorly concealed surprise. As George greeted other attendees, Jenkins approached Michael. Well, Michael," he said with a tight smile. "So now you're Ortega's personal butler?" Michael smiled, unprovoked. "Manager of his automotive collection," he calmly corrected. "A job that allows me to learn something new every day." Jenkins let out a condescending laugh. "You can always come back to Auto Palace, you know. Your position is still vacant. Nobody sells like you do." Michael looked across the room toward George, who was conversing animatedly with other collectors. Despite being probably the wealthiest man in the room, he dressed with his usual simplicity. Well-cut trousers but without ostentation, quality shirt but without visible brand, comfortable but immaculate shoes. His presence radiated a natural authority that no one questioned, a respect that didn't need to be bought with external symbols. "Thank you, Dr. Jenkins," Michael replied, "but I've found my place." During the auction, Michael sat next to George, discreetly offering his observations about each vehicle. His months of intensive study and newfound passion for automotive history had given him knowledge that surprised even veteran collectors. When the Bugattis were presented, Michael leaned toward George. "The first one has been excessively restored," he murmured. "They've sacrificed authenticity for appearance. The second one, however, has a respectful restoration. It retains original components and authentic patina. It's worth every euro they ask for." George nodded, trusting his protégé's judgment. When the hammer fell, the second Bugatti had been acquired for the Harrison collection, while the first, visually more impressive but less authentic, was bought by a Russian oligarch advised by Dr. Jenkins. "You've learned well," George commented as they left the event. "You've seen beyond the superficial shine." "I had a good teacher," Michael replied with a smile. Exactly 1 year after that first encounter at Auto Palace, George and Michael were again at a luxury dealership. This time, Michael accompanied the farmer as his personal advisor, not as a salesman dazzled by appearances. The dealership in question was not Auto Palace, but a smaller, more discreet establishment specializing in high-tech and environmentally sustainable models. A young salesman, nervous and overly formal, attended to them with that exaggerated deference Michael recognized too well in his former self a year ago. The object of interest, a new limited edition hybrid model, barely 50 units worldwide, combining supercar performance with reduced emissions and sustainable materials. "This vehicle represents the future of luxury motoring," the salesman explained, reciting the catalog from memory. "Recycled carbon fiber, lab-grown vegan leather, hybrid engine with 700 horsepower, but barely 80 grams of emissions per kilometer. The price, €800,000, reflects not only its exclusivity, but also the investment in research and development." George listened politely, asking precise, technical questions that evidenced his deep knowledge. Michael, meanwhile, observed the salesman, recognizing in him the old Michael, the desperation to impress, the tension before an important potential client, the tendency to value people solely by their buying capacity. When the presentation ended, George turned to his advisor. "What do you think, Michael?" Michael had spent the last hour meticulously examining the vehicle, its construction, its technology, its concept. "Technically, it's impressive," he replied honestly. "The system integration is extraordinary, and the vision behind the design is laudable. However, the hybrid system still has limitations for intensive use. I suggest waiting for the next generation, when the technology is more mature and tested. Furthermore, this particular model is overpriced due to exclusivity. If we wait 18 months, we will have a better vehicle for less money." The salesman looked heartbroken by the relentless but fair analysis. George nodded, valuing the opinion. "Then we will wait," he decided. "Thank you for your sincere advice." Upon leaving, the young salesman accompanied them to the door, visibly disappointed by the lost sale, but maintaining professional composure. George paused for a moment. "Young man, I appreciate your attention today," he said kindly. "I especially value that you treated us with the same respect since we entered, without being carried away by appearances. You are a promising professional." The salesman, surprised by the comment, awkwardly thanked him for the compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. It has been a pleasure assisting you, even if you haven't decided to buy today." "Good relationships last longer than a single sale," George replied. "We will return when the next model is launched." Outside, George and Michael walked toward the white Rolls-Royce that awaited them, driven by Mark, the same trusted employee who had been present on that first trip to Cordoba. "You've changed, Michael," George observed as they drove away from the dealership. "A year ago you would have insisted on buying that car, regardless of its technical limitations or inflated price." Michael smiled, acknowledging the truth in those words. "I've learned from the best, Mr. Harrison," he replied, looking at Madrid through the window, seeing the city with new eyes. "I've learned to value substance over shine." "You know," the farmer said, as the Rolls silently advanced through the streets of the capital, "my grandfather used to say that true wealth is not in owning valuable things, but in correctly valuing what you own." "A wise man, no doubt," Michael commented. "He was," George confirmed. "He lived through 2 wars, a dictatorship, and times of hunger. But he never lost his dignity or his ability to distinguish what was truly important. When he died, his only watch was the same one he had used for 50 years. But he left a prosperous farm, a united family, and a legacy of respect. That endures to this day." The vehicle stopped in front of a discreet but elegant restaurant. It wasn't one of those trendy establishments where the chef's celebrity or the difficulty of getting a table justified exorbitant prices. It was a place where the quality of the ingredients and the honesty of traditional cuisine were the priority. "Today we celebrate your anniversary with us," George said as they got out of the vehicle. "A year of transformation." Inside, the entire Harrison family waited. Mr. Patrick, Alexander with Eleanor and their 2 young children, Clara, and even some trusted farm workers who were visiting Madrid. Michael, moved by the gesture, looked around at these people who had welcomed him not only as an employee, but as part of something greater. People who valued work well done, honesty and living tradition. People for whom a given word was worth more than any contract, and for whom respect was granted not according to a bank account, but according to human quality. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," he simply said as they took their seats, "for teaching me to see beyond the shine." George smiled, with that serenity granted only by the certainty of living according to one's own values. "Don't judge a man by his clothes, Michael," he replied as the waiter served wine from the Harrison cellar. "The dust of the field doesn't soil the worth of those who work with their hands." And as the food was served and conversations flowed naturally, Michael understood that he had found something money couldn't buy: a moral compass, a sense of purpose, an understanding of the true value of things and people. Outside, the white Rolls-Royce waited patiently, a symbol of technical excellence and good taste, but also a reminder that the most beautiful objects are simply tools for living better, not ends in themselves. Their true value lay not in their market price, but in the stories they contained and in the dignified hands that possessed them. And at that moment, surrounded by the Harrison family, Michael knew he had completed a journey much longer and more significant than that Madrid-Cordoba trip a year ago. A journey from superficiality to depth, from appearances to essence, from price to value.